Okay, so we are back on the air with Ballistic Strength Radio. With Charlie Fornelli, master of sport, Canadian kettlebell pioneer of sorts. Did I hit all the marks there?
Oh, absolutely. Keep it coming. No, just kidding.
Okay. So there are a few things I wanted to ask you. We were actually chatting a little bit at the IKFF meet in Vancouver, and you were getting me up to speed with the fact that you had recently experienced an injury. Could you tell the listeners what kind of injury it was, how long ago that happened, how it happened, and what you've been doing to get yourself back up to quote-unquote normal?
All right. Well, I mean, I've had lots of little naggy things, but this is the first real big thing that was not like a typical me injury. I was playing soccer and, you know, did the usual thing, tried to kick a ball that was above my pay grade and felt a pretty significant pop in my hip and gave it a bit of time. It was getting better, did some physio, tried, you know, being kind of a dummy and playing soccer not too long after. And I mean, within 2 minutes of the game starting, 2 passes, I felt my hip just popped and it felt completely unstable. And I was done. And then after that, it actually had, it didn't really swell at all initially in the first injury.
How about the pain?
But the second, it was quite painful at first. And then this second time was very painful and it got quite swollen and bled quite a bit. So, you know, whatever I did initially, I completely mucked up the second time around and did end up tearing my hamstring quite, you know, like proximal to the hip. So it was just a really awkward injury. I'm not a very flexible individual anyway, so this just made it really challenging to do a lot of activities. So it coincided fairly well with some other things going on, and I ended up taking quite a bit of time off. Months of almost all training, kettlebells for sure, and but you know, gradually started fitting things back in. So it was just lots of mobilizing, a lot of, you know, some ball work, you know, like getting into, you know, like tennis ball, lacrosse ball, getting into that upper hip, just being that it was quite difficult to get at it any other way. And gradually started.
And you're a kinesiologist by trade.
Yeah. Yes.
To some degree. And now, when you work with clients, do you have much experience bringing them back from injury, or is that for the most part taken care of when you take, say, referrals from physios and things like that?
Yeah. Generally, I would be doing, well, not generally, I would be doing quote unquote post rehab. So I would be sort of more after the acute healing process, and they've sort of gotten the okay, and then that's when I would come in. And then now I'm a relatively clumsy and oafish individual, so I do tend to bang myself up. So I've had plenty of time working on myself, but client-wise, I'm not that first responder when it comes to injury.
And so due to the severity of this injury, I mean, what kind of proportion, as far as your own personal rehab went with this injury, how much of that came from working with a physio and just using the knowledge base that you have personally?
For myself, honestly, I felt like, and this is how I've always felt, and this is in absolutely no way, shape, or form meant to be a knock on physios or anything like that. But for myself, physios are smarter than me. I give them that credit where that credit is due. So I've always appreciated that real, okay, let's see what's wrong, and then I'll run with it. I get ideas, and mainly it's like them just kicking me in the butt and saying, do the things that you know you should be doing.
Or telling you what things you definitely shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and I mean, generally, once I have an idea, because I've always been quite interested in that side of things. Regardless, even though I'm not specifically working with injuries, I am very often working around chronic pain and things like that, just with the population that I work with. So I do spend a lot of time following individuals who talk a lot about pain science and things like of that nature, and exercises to avoid in this instance and that instance. So it was really just getting that confidence to say, okay, this is what I need to work on, and then going forward with it. And that's really where I've felt like, for me personally, a physio has really fit that role in these later years, not in the early years. Early years, I was not nearly as interested in things as I am now.
Yeah. Some of the narrative behind the difference between what a physio is suited for and maybe what you're suited for is, a physio is getting someone from a subnormal condition to, more or less a normal condition. And then, you're more or less still doing that. But in the sense of like being a strength coach per se, that's leaning more towards performance, getting someone a little bit above average. And let's face it, average is not really that great in the first place. So the information we get from physios is there's a place for it, and we use that to help inform our decisions. But once, like for someone like you, especially, I mean, you've been rehabbing in somewhat of a remedial sense, a really basic sense, but then you're also interested in getting yourself back up to a high level of competitive status. So that's where the physio is not really going to help you that much, or I mean, the means to be able to do that with a physio is fantastic, but unfortunately, most of us don't have that means, right? Like, I mean, I'd love to have a physio on staff. Having that would, of course, be a very fantastic thing. But no, absolutely, that's a big part of it. Is it's about getting, when you're, and I think that's where that's where we as strength coaches and kettlebell coaches or whatever it is, in that regard, that's where that's where our role fits in, right? Is moving beyond that just general baseline and stepping things up. Yeah. I myself have had my fair share of injuries. Now I've never actually had a injury other than, say, like chronic tendinosis, that kind of thing. I've never had an injury that was kettlebell sport related. Usually it's most of the time where it becomes like a debilitating thing is when I'm on a few occasions where I've back squatted. And which sucks because I love squatting. It's one of my favorite things to work on. But at the same time, when you've got too many things on your plate, sometimes it's difficult to put as much focus into that one area as much as should be given to, and sometimes things happen. And so my most recent episode with that, I had gone to a physio, and mainly I was trying to get some form of diagnosis, something to better inform how I was going to get myself back to a competitive status. And thankfully, their opinion was that it wasn't anything too severe. She said that the articulations were moving okay, but she said that I may have irritated some facets, and that was the main thing. So and she didn't really have anything much more than that to offer me. And it was basically just, do a couple of these exercises, do a few gentle stretches, proceed with caution, that kind of thing. It was more of that, a little bit of reassurance and a little bit of encouragement to, start slow, but you'll be able to get back where you are, kind of thing. And sometimes, at the very least, that's what you need, because otherwise you're flying blind a little bit and you just don't know what's going on back there. While at the same time, you can get the opinion of an expert, but also unless you have an X-ray or an MRI type thing, even then, still, you don't really have the clearest picture. And I was like, I've probably got a bunch of bulge discs back there. And she's like, yeah, that's probably true. But that's what we know about the epidemiology of spinal health, is that a lot of people, if you take any given room full of people, they probably have asymptomatic spinal conditions, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
It doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. It's there. And it's good to be aware of it, but we try not to let that stuff kind of hold us back. So with your injuries, now this one happened playing soccer. Have you had experience with injuries specific to kettlebell sport?
You know what? Most of it has been, like you said, more just kind of tendinopathy kind of things. Sorry. So, and a lot of times it's been like things around the wrist, and then occasionally some stuff with shoulders. Me personally, I would say the only injury that I've ever had where I would definitely say is a kettlebell injury, or an injury as a result of my kettlebell lifting, was really me doing a one-arm long cycle set with the 48 kilo after doing biathlon with the 28s. And that was the first time I'd ever done the 28s for a 10-minute jerk set. And I, pinched something in my back and, going overhead with that 48 kilo. Right. Mm-hmm. And I mean, but that's, I don't blame that on the kettlebells. I blame that on the me overhead positioning. You know what I mean? So that's where I say, like, that's less of a kettlebell injury because I've done it doing other things, right? Like,
any sport, especially ones that are highly repetitive, are going to lend themselves to little things. There's a reason why we call basic chondromalacia runner's knee, right? It's so repetitive, it lends itself to some inflammation in the patellar tendon or in that general area. So same thing with kettlebells. And I've read some other guys, some other Russians being asked, what's the most common injuries? Well, usually elbows and knees, right? Because those we're using those joints over and over and over again. Well, thankfully I haven't had any issues with the knees. Elbows get sore from time to time. Although they felt pretty good recently. I always get this stiffness in my wrists though, and I could probably crack my wrists every 10 minutes. Yeah. Basically, it builds up, and then 10 minutes later I just give it a little torque, and it just clicks. And that has not been that's happened since kettlebell sport, definitely. So, and that's just from a lot of reps using the arms and stuff like that. I'm trying to think of anything else. I mean, rack position was definitely a chore trying to get it right. I have a whole bunch of knots between my shoulder blades that occasionally, sometimes when I start even a long cycle set, I'll just pull something back there and it'll just resonate up into the back of my neck. And I'm like, God damn it. That actually happened at an in-house once at Linda's, where right before, as I was warming up for my long cycle set, I got a quick pull back there. And, but it didn't hamper me that much. It's one of those things where once you kind of get into it, you can kind of put it out of your head a little bit. It didn't really immobilize me. But that's one nagging thing that comes up, and that's not really causative from kettlebell, that's kind of one thing that's just always been there, and from years of working out and lack of rolling that area out, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a spot for me too, definitely.